Here. All right. Well, welcome. My name is Kate Harmon, and I'm the Director of Cross-Campus Engagement for the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship. And I'm really excited today to have Rande Bruhn. Rande is the CEO, president, and co-founder of multiple companies, including Soma Games, Code Monkeys, BS Holdings, Inc., and Bruhn Holdings, Inc. So I'd like to thank you again, Rande, for joining us. I thought we would start today by talking a little bit about your career in general. If you could kind of give us a brief overview of what you were like as a student and kind of walk us through your career to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I attended the University of Oregon in the late 70s. Actually, the first one in my family to go to college, to complete college, and eventually went on and got a master's degree. And I'm also a certified public accountant, licensed in the state of Oregon. So I probably was a bit of an overachiever relative to my family, but it was a great opportunity in the 70s to be able to go to school. And so I graduated in 1978. I had a degree in finance. Also had a secondary concentration in the area of economics. I actually started out as an economics major, switched to finance about halfway through my 4 years at the U of O, graduated in finance. And after I graduated, immediately went to Europe for a couple of months. And it's a decision that I look back now in my 60s and say, I'm really, really glad I did that. I worked hard during college. And when I got out, I just felt like I really needed to go do something else. And it was a great experience. It sort of gave me a different flavor as I sort of launched into life.
Great. Can you give us a little bit of just sort of some of the roles and different companies that you worked with throughout your career, just to give a little bit of perspective?
Sure. In my early years, I largely focused on large companies. You know, coming out of school with a degree in finance and economics, it was kind of a natural place in big companies where they needed those sorts of services. And so that's where I really focused, probably the first 7 years of my career. Mostly Fortune 500 companies, when Portland had Fortune 500 companies, which is not so the case these days. But worked in truck manufacturing, doing purchasing and inventory analysis. I worked in a resource development company for several years in their accounting and the treasury department. We actually had a company in Portland, Oregon that owned numerous coal mines, silver mines, gold mines, oil and gas drilling operations around the United States. And so I worked for them for about 5 years. And it was during that time that I actually went back to grad school in Portland to start my MBA. And once I was in my MBA program, I decided I wanted to become a CPA first. I looked around the room at my big company, and I realized that all the people that were successful were ones who had CPAs after their name. So I put my MBA on hold, pursued that for several years, passed the CPA exam the first try in the mid-'80s. And as a result, I ended up having to go to work for one of the big accounting firms to get my license. So I spent several years at Arthur Andersen back in the mid-'80s when that was a really good firm, and got some great experience with a lot of small companies, high-tech companies, software, hardware, banking, healthcare, all sorts of things. And it was at that point that I really made a decision that when I left public accounting that I wanted to focus on small to middle-sized companies. And so that's really where I spent the last 30 years of my career, is focusing on smaller companies.
Very good. Very good. Can you share a little bit about what made you decide to go down sort of the business and economics route while you were a student at UO? Did it have a lot to do with the fact that you were first generation from your family to go to school? And like, what were you thinking at that time that you might want your career to be as a college student?
Well, I seem to have a natural proclivity for business things. When I was in high school, I did some things in that arena. I was a writer. I was a newspaper managing editor. I was in the drama department. I did a lot of acting, but I also did a lot of business manager things, both for the school newspaper as well as for the drama department. And that just felt like a comfortable thing for me to do. And I liked, at the time, I liked the idea of economics and its sort of broad application to solving problems of the world. Later, I decided to become more focused on the finance side. It felt, at my point in life, felt a bit more practical than economics, which seemed very theoretical. And as I've sort of gone through my career, I realized I'm much more of a practical problem solver, less sort of a theoretician kind of person. So I think that was a good choice for me. And then also later to focus on accounting. But business in general, I like the idea of businesses in the middle of trying to solve society's problems, providing ways for people to earn a living, work at things that they enjoy, ways to make a difference in society. And it's a giant puzzle. And I like to solve those kinds of puzzles. And so that's what really drew me into business.
Great, great. I know that you have held multiple C-suite level positions from controller to CFO, CEO, chairman, and most recently as co-founder of many different companies. And these are all in a variety of different industries, from manufacturing to high tech to video gaming. Can you share a little bit about your thinking in terms of why you got involved with the types of businesses you did? Did you have a particular strategy for moving from one role to another? Can you kind of give us a little bit of background on that?
Sure. Well, when I was younger, I probably, to be honest, would say, the strategy was probably not well thought out at the time, other than because I decided to focus more on the accounting side of business. There was a strategy behind that, in that when I went to grad school, I realized that accounting was way more practical than I ever thought it was. When I was an undergraduate at U of O, I just sort of didn't fully understand that just yet. But after having been out in the working world for a while, working in the finance departments of big companies, I realized that accounting was really at the center of the financial aspects of the company. And a company is an economic entity. And so its success is measured in economic terms. And the people that determine that are the ones that measure, which are the accountants. And so strategically, I thought, maybe I should focus on accounting because that will put me right in the middle of everything in the business. And that was a good decision in the long run. And I still, at my stage in my career, that's still really beneficial because it forces me to know absolutely everything about everything that goes on in the business. You have to know about operations and sales and, strategy and budgeting and all those things. So that was a strategic decision to focus in accounting. And I think that was a really good decision on my part. I think that answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. More recently, you've gotten into multiple sort of entrepreneurial endeavors. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Soma Games, at Code Monkeys, these various video gaming independent studios that you're involved with?
Well, yes, and it's very different than the rest of my experience, because my experience was, again, in early years, large companies, Fortune 500 companies, then public accounting and consulting services and those sorts of things, and then into mid-size, small, high-tech type companies. And so, where was I going with this?
At Soma, what is your role? Like, why did you get into this sort of,
Okay.
entrepreneurial endeavors?
Yeah, and in those earlier stage companies, there's less flexibility. You've got more, you've got outside investors that you're responsible to. You've got procedures you have to follow, those sorts of things. So I made this decision to want to do something once I left that world that was more independent, more entrepreneurial. Now, I've always been referred to as an entrepreneurial CPA, which in some circles is an oxymoron because most CPAs are generally not very entrepreneurial. They're very procedure oriented and they're very good at what they do. But as an entrepreneur, you have to think outside the box. Sometimes you have to press the limits. And I joke with my business partner now, who is very entrepreneurial, that thinking outside the box is important. But I used to be one of those people that helped design the box. And so now to be able, in an entrepreneurial setting, step outside the box has been great. It's had its challenges for me, personality-wise. And so my business partner really challenges me in that arena where I'm able to challenge him on the concepts of control, legalities, regulatory issues, those sorts of things. And in that sense, as partners, we've made a really good partnership. But in terms of what I do every day as an entrepreneur, particularly now as the president and CEO, is I have to oversee all the things that go on in the business. And switching from the big corporate world into a independent game studio, entertainment environment is like night and day. And so I joke with people that I am the parent in the room, and my partner is in charge of running the creative and the operating side of the business. And he's a creative. If you look at personality charts, he's way over on the far side of creative.
Interesting.
I'm sort of equally in all four quadrants. So I understand the creative aspects, the operational aspects, but I also know the law and I know the financial requirements and regulatory requirements. So that's kind of the overall role that I have to play, is more the parent.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Good. Can you give us a little bit of background, like what would a typical day or week look for you in your role right now?
Well, I spend a lot of time thinking about high-level things. As a CEO, I'm responsible for strategy, for fundraising. I have to think long-term, but I also have to think short-term, and I also have to think details. So I'm pretty good at that. My personality is I can do the details well, and that comes from my training as in finance and accounting as a CPA. But I also have to be able to step back and say, where do we want to be in 5 years? So I spend a lot of my day bouncing back and forth between the details of running a company and thinking about structure, thinking about long-term exit strategies, building relationships in the community, all those things. So those are very important as a small entrepreneurial environment. Relationships are key. And I have found, and even in our current environment, it's very challenging, is that my long-term relationships that I have built over the years have paid off. Relationships with bankers who are willing to work with you when times are tough because they respect you and they trust you. So, for a young person coming out of college and thinking about being an entrepreneur, think about the long-term ramifications of building strong, healthy relationships across the board.
It's a really good point. How does your company or you personally measure success? Is there any kind of metrics, KPIs that you use to sort of measure how you're making progress? And if so, do you have any sort of best practices for how you motivate your team to sort of meet these metrics?
Sure. Well, KPIs, those sorts of things are very important because you want to sit down, when you have some quiet time, you and your team, and talk about what's really important. And I've just taken my team actually through this process the last 18 months. We've been in business as an independent game studio entertainment products company for about 11 years. And we sort of felt like we needed to revisit what was important. And so over the last year or so, we have pursued this idea of our mission, our values, objectives. What are the things that are important to what we want to accomplish in life as a business? So we have reestablished what those are, starting from the top down. And what are our overall value statements? How is that incorporated into our overall mission statement? And then how does that play out through monthly, quarterly, annual, even daily objectives that help define the decisions that you make every day? And so I've used lots of KPIs over the years, lots of financial KPIs. There's a plethora of ways that you can measure how successful or not your company's doing. Some are short-term measures. How's your order booking cycle going? Some are long-term measures of profitability, liquidity, those kinds of things that are important on the financial side. And then motivating people with those. Once you've decided from the top down how you want to run your business every day, motivating your people with things that motivate them in that direction to that kind of performance. That can be through management by objectives. It can be through bonus programs, commissions, for your outside salespeople. It can be quarterly bonuses, monthly bonuses, annual bonuses. I've used all of those in my various companies. Entertainment is a very different, industry basically, because you're creating products that you don't know will be successful in the end. So measuring your day-to-day success is a lot about, okay, what did we say we were going to do last week? What are we going to do next week? What is holding us up from accomplishing the next level of creativity? Because you're creating a product that's a creative product. It morphs over time because you understand things work, things don't work. The markets change. What people want every day is different. And at the end of the day, you try to create a great product, and then you hope, like when you go to the movies, you watch a movie, you either like it or you don't. And that's the same thing with video games, is that there's a sense of either you hit the mark or you didn't. And you learn from that, and then you move forward.
Great, good point. What have been some of the challenges that you've had to overcome to move your business forward?
Well, I think as an entrepreneur, one of the greatest challenges is always capital. Smaller businesses, entrepreneurial businesses are always capital constrained. And so for a young entrepreneur going into business for themselves, I always recommend to people that they should try to save up at least 2 years worth of whatever their needs are going to be. As a young person, if they're married, if they have a home, whatever their requirements are, you ought to try to have 2 years in the bank. You might be able to sneak by with a year, but 80% of new businesses fail because they lack capital. And if you're going to start a business, be saving while you have a job somewhere else, working on your idea, on the weekends and in the evenings, saving money. And when you're ready to make that jump, make sure you have a year or two set aside, because it's going to take you that long to build that business. So capital constraint is really a big deal. And I think this whole idea of relationships and who are the people that you're going to need to depend on at some point in your life. They're bankers, they're lawyers, they're accountants, all, that are going to give you advice. And you want to surround yourself with really good people, smart people, and people that you can trust, because there will be people that you'll run into that you can't trust. And you want to be able to ferret all that out.
Great. You mentioned earlier that you've always been entrepreneurial. Can you share a particular experience in your past where you were opportunistic or entrepreneurial?
Well, I have a great case with Soma, my current company, is that many years ago, probably back in about 2013, we got involved with an individual in Los Angeles, actually in Hollywood, who had the rights to a piece of intellectual property that is quite valuable. And he had the right to develop all the aspects of that property, including movies, merchandising, gaming, etc. And then he came to us through a relationship with my business partner and said, would you guys like to take on some pieces of the gaming aspect of this license? And we said, sure. So we started working with him. And what happened over a few years is that he failed as a business person. He failed actually, and this is where we did not do enough due diligence. He failed to pay his license, his master license fee. And we had a sub license under him, and we paid a sub license fee to him, but he hadn't paid his master license. That put us in a very awkward place when he was starting to fail. So I looked at that as an investor, as a business person, and had an opportunity to invest some money to help preserve the situation. And it was an investment in his operation, which was very risky under the circumstances. But I looked at it and I said, I think this is worthwhile, because what it may do is it may buy us some time, and it may buy us some relationship actually with the master licensor, who was really mad at him. And as a result, they were really mad at us because they thought we were the same as him. So the opportunistic thing was to invest some money in his operation and try to save it. But at the same time, it bought us a relationship with the licensor. And in the end, it took us at least a year after that to build some relationship with the master licensor, because they didn't trust us in the beginning. And so we spent a lot of time building relationship and trust with them, to the point where now they love what we do, they trust us, they love our creative input. And our partner in LA went out of business, and we ended up with a direct relationship with the largest publisher in the world. And that has just paid huge dividends in terms of developing Soma, developing our business and our brand, because now people know that we control the video gaming for this particular IP. And we couldn't have done that without taking advantage of that one particular time. It was quite dicey, actually.
That's great. That's great to hear. Well, you shared a successful endeavor. Can you share with us maybe an entrepreneurial endeavor that maybe wasn't as successful, and what you learned from that?
Sure. Well, we all have those. And honestly, that's the thing that's great, because I've worked in other countries in the business world. And one of the things I love about America is that we do have the right to fail at something. And we learn from that. And I think that's an acceptable business experience. But honestly, you sometimes learn way more from those failures than you do from your successes. So one of those failures for me, and I actually was somewhat conservative, and so the failure wasn't horribly expensive, but I got involved in a very high tech startup. Had some great technology, leading edge laser technology, using femto lasers that pulse at a quadrillionth of a second. And the company was largely focused on the semiconductor space, where they wanted to go in and assist in producing semiconductor, parts, those sorts of things, for the likes of some of the big semiconductor companies. And they had the ability to do that. This technology was great, but that business is like impossible to get into as a startup. You've got to have millions and millions of dollars, and you have to be in the right time of the cycle. Cycles are about 3 years. If you come in at the wrong time, you got to wait till the next cycle. And so I came in, I looked at that business, I said, that just isn't going to work. So I refocused the business in a different area, in a manufacturing environment that actually was quite popular. And we had a lot of interest, but I couldn't raise the capital in the United States. And so my business partner was a native of Taiwan, and he had some relationships actually in mainland China, where we were able to actually apply to the government of China for financing. And my company applied to a city in mainland China where there were 1,000 companies that applied, and my company was number one. But what I didn't know in that whole process at the time, we were just starting what was going on in China, starting to understand China and their how they deal with intellectual property from other countries. how they control the environments. And I was uncomfortable with that. So I didn't do enough due diligence in that process. But an area where I didn't do enough due diligence also was with respect to my business partner. I had asked him to run this operation in China because he well educated in China. He grew up, learning the language. I didn't know the language. I would not recommend ever going into a business where you don't understand the language of your business partners. I liked my business partner personally, but what I found out in the course of conversation in China with the government of China, watching my business partner, is that he gave in to everything that the Chinese government asked for and wasn't really negotiating, and I didn't understand why that was. So I asked him about it, and what came out of it was that he was afraid of the Chinese security forces, and while he was living in China, he expected that they would come round him up in the middle of the night and take him out into the woods and execute him.
Wow. Wow.
So what I learned from that was due diligence, and it's personal due diligence as well as your typical business due diligence. And I didn't do that. So I just looked at him and I said, I can't put any more money into this. I can't ask my friends to put money into it. And so I terminated the whole thing. And I lost a little bit of money in that process, but I could have lost a lot more. And so I walked away from that. And at that point, then I started focusing on my independent game studio. And that's been lots of fun.
Great. Well, that's a great learning point. What do you think, as you look back over your career, that has been like the one or two traits that have led to your success?
Well, I think probably in retrospect, probably the biggest thing is relationship. Business is a lot about relationship. And, I talk to people that hate the idea of networking. And I'm not a big networking, kind of in the traditional networking, work the room kind of person. I just don't, that's not my thing. But I am about deep relationship with individuals. And so I've spent the last 40 years in my career basically building relationships with people where I'm able to establish trust, responsibility, dependability. They ask me to do something, they know it will get done, and I'll do it well. I will work hard. And ultimately, as a finance person, which is the route that I came up through in my career, I could be trusted with a lot of money, with a lot of responsibility, and the people over the years grew to trust me with that. And that actually flowed out into my personal life, where I would get people that would come to me who have drinking problems or drug problems. And they would say, Randy, can I take you out for a cup of coffee and talk about some challenges I'm having in my personal life? Because they weren't focusing enough on their personal life. They just threw their life into their business world and their personal life suffered. Mm. So I've been able to build those kinds of relationships over the years. And so, as I said, when you're in tough times, you got a great relationship with your banker. They're going to work with you. In my aerospace company, nobody wanted to do business with that company at the time because they were just in deep trouble. But because I stepped in as the chief financial officer at the time and had relationships, I was able to bring new capital into the business and save the business from bankruptcy. So I say focus on relationships, focus on what's important to you. And I think it's important for young entrepreneurs to understand too that your personal life is important. A lot of people just throw themselves entirely into their job, their work. And I once had someone say to me, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So focus on things that are important to you. I worked with accountants who are very successful, or also successful classic guitarists or concert pianists or vocal people. I'm really big in the entertainment space, and those things are important to me. So it provides balance in your life, and that's really important as an entrepreneur.
That makes sense. Well, to wrap up, I think our last question is, if you were to look back over your career, would you have done anything differently, studied anything differently, developed certain skill sets that you didn't do till you needed it, anything like that?
Well, I think for me, I would have done all of my education earlier. I married in my early 20s, and then went back to grad school and then did the CPA route. So that was very stressful, stressful on my marriage, stressful on, and then I had a daughter toward the end of some of that. So I spent a good 10 years after I left U of O, further developing my education and my credentials, et cetera. I would have done that a lot sooner. I mean, for me, part of it was finances, coming from a family that didn't have any resources. And so having to adjust to all that. But for the student who has the ability to go back to grad school, to finish professional certifications, I would do that sooner than later. And I remember a young man that I counseled as part of the mentorship program at U of O a year or two ago, who asked me about getting married, about starting family, and starting a business. And I remember telling him, I said, don't do all that at once. It's just not healthy. So that's one of the things I would do differently.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Randy. We appreciate you sharing your the experience and advice. Rande Bruhn, CEO, President, and co-owner of Soma Games. Thank you so much, Randy.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.